Hey there! Today we are talking about mixed depth hexagon twists, specifically ones with twofold rotational symmetry. Now I said ones plural there, and stick around until the very end to see the second option. So when I was looking through like what patterns can I use to demonstrate this twist, I at first thought like, oh, I'll do this pattern, and then I realized that's way too few repeats per amount of grid. And this pattern is way too complex, but I figured out a way that we can put hexagon twists on opposite sides in the same tiling as that first blue pattern that I showed you. So we'll be folding by column, and we'll have roughly this appearance, but things will be spaced a little further out so we don't have that flagstone spacing. So that's what we're going to fold today. I'm using a 32 division triangle grid on a square. That's 32 divisions from edge parallel to opposite edge parallel. And let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is mark the center of my paper so that I can zoom in and you can all stay oriented to where I'm at. And I'm going to mark it in pen. And I actually encourage you to mark your paper the first time or two that you're folding a new twist. So coming on out, one of the interesting things about the mixed depth hexagon twist, at least the one that I'm going to show you today, is that it's not centered on a grid intersection, so it won't be rotationally symmetric around the center. But if you want to be able to follow the exact steps that I'm doing, then the orientation is important. I've got my edge parallel grid direction oriented vertically. So let's say that we wanted to fold an open hexagon twist around this center. I would have a pleat coming in this way, a pleat coming in this way, and I'm going to go ahead and draw their extensions in. And I'm being very specific about which ones I'm drawing. And then I'm going to draw another pleat, and this one is going to go further. That's going to be our double depth of the double depth pleat. So I'm going to have a valley here, a valley here, and then this valley is going to be 2 spaces out. So what does that mean for continuing the twist? Well, I can say that when we have our open hexagon twist, those folds are going to end up being in these locations. And so we keep the angles. The angles are set by flat foldability rules of the vertices. And we're going to basically stretch out our hexagon. So instead of coming in here, we're going to pull that out to here. So this means that my next mountains are in these locations. And this is what you're going to see when you're looking at a crease pattern of this kind of twist. So red for mountain, blue for valley. And when we're folding, we're going to be looking a little bit more at kind of the vertical form, which is going to have kind of that puffy star appearance at the 2 ends. And then it's going to come into out 2 in the middle. So to see what this looks like in 3D, let's go ahead and bring up our pleats. So pleat being the mountain valley pair. And I'm going to start with really any of my pleats and work my way around, adding the next one on top, on top, on top. I'm rotating as I do this so that the pleat that I'm working on is on my right hand side. And I'm using my left hand to more or less ensure that nothing is popping open while I'm getting new pleats in place. My left hand is maintaining contact with the table. So the really important thing as we're setting this up is to make sure that the valleys of those double depth pleats really are 2 grid spacings away. So there should be one on either side, and we'll end up with this stars connected by this little bridge shape, and we can also puff that out a bit so that the edges are more these 2 stars joining together. And once we have that, just like the open hexagon twist, this is a very easy one to squash. We just press from the top, and I did a little bit of pushing towards those corners. And I'll use my bone folder to get everything flattened out. So for repeating this, for getting a good density of repeats on a reasonable size grid, what we're going to do is then flip over, and I'm going to keep my edge parallels vertical, flipping top to bottom, and I'm going to identify which 2 are my single depth pleats on both sides and which 2 are my double depth pleats opposite each other. So on those single depth pleats, we're going to put in a closed triangle twist at tube pleat spacing, which is to say, and actually, yeah, it's going to be, and by the way, I haven't folded this pattern before. This is all on the fly. The easy way to reference it actually is going to be that the corner comes to the corner of the open hole. So we're going to have 2 spaces from valley to valley. And in the case of the upper pleat, the one that is going diagonally, so I'll refer to these as diagonal and vertical single depth pleats. That one is going to be the classic tube where the valley goes up 1 spacing out from the folded mountain. The mountain is 1 spacing away from the valley. And if it's more comfortable for you, bring it around to your right hand, but for demonstration purposes, I'm going to show it in the same orientation. I'm opening up that pleat until I get to the point of intersection of the existing mountain and the new mountain. And then I can squash that triangle twist in place. There's all kinds of interesting things that are allowed when you use open hexagons and closed triangles, and this pattern is no exception. And then on the other single depth pleat on this side, notice I did diagonal, then vertical. This is going to help us on the other side. I'm going to run my valley exactly along the folded mountain because that is already 2 spaces from my folded valley. And use that to set up my closed triangle twist. And squash. Now I have a pleat overlap here, and again I'm going to flip top to bottom to bring up that overlap. And that is going to, so notice how on the overlap there is this hexagon corner, like I have, like if this was going to be a normal open hexagon twist, that would be the center. And so I've got two pleats of the open hexagon, and on the third, that will be my double depth direction. So instead of going in one, out one, I'm going to go into, out two. Make sure that valley is all the way in. And this is going to cause some overlapping layers. Just make sure you're not unfolding the triangle. It's easy to catch the pleat from the back. So into, out two, add the next direction of the open hexagon, in one, out one, add the next direction of the open hexagon, in one, out one, add the next direction, and this is going to be the final double depth pleat. And again, it'll be overlapping the existing pleats. And once we have that set up, we can go ahead and squash. So this is going to look like a massive staircase in the end. I call this pattern Giant's Causeway. And we're actually going to be able to repeat the same pattern on the back of the paper. And I'm looking at the chat. Hi, Nancy. Hi, Orlu. And as always, the recording is always available afterwards. So no worries if you can't fold along right away. And in fact, I do encourage watching once first before you attempt to fold. So from here, I'm going to flip to the back side again, and I'm going to continue to the edge of the paper in the same direction we were working before, taking first the diagonal single depth pleat and making a new triangle with tube pleat spacing with the vertical. It'll also have tube pleat spacing with the double depth pleat. And notice that since that double depth pleat is deeper, then we tuck this pleat inside. We could also tuck it on the outside. Either way, this is just less stress on the paper. And then we're going to want our next triangle to be up against the existing pleat because it is a double depth pleat. And so in order to get the tube, we need to come all the way up against that double depth edge. And one thing I'm noticing here in the corner, my paper snarled. I can smooth that out at any time. And in general, anytime I'm smoothing out a big stack of pleats, I want to be very careful not to add new creases. So coming back to the front side, I'm going to open this up, and I'm seeing where the puffy star for the one side of the open hexagon is, and going in one, out one from the vertical, I can see that I need a double depth diagonal coming up through there. And I don't have quite enough grid to get the rest of the folds around, but I can see that in order to preserve the hexagon-ish shape, I do need to have a little bit of a kind of a pinch fold there, but that's really not super necessary. It's really getting the last little bits of the partial twist in. So coming back to the triangle side, I'm going to now work down towards the opposite side, and I'm going to continue the pattern of doing the diagonal first and then the vertical, because that was setting me up really well for the pleat overlap when I went back to the hexagon side. So doing the diagonal single depth pleat into that closed triangle, and then the vertical single depth pleat. Notice that this is running our new pleat under the pleat we just set up with the previous triangle. And if I want to make this less kind of fixed in place, once the triangle is squashed, I can tuck it into the double depth pleat, and that'll make it easier on my grid to basically be happy about where it's at. And if I have any inconsistencies in my grid, this is going to be essential for not adding new marks, not smearing the grid line out on the paper. So now that I have my pleat overlap, I'm going to come up here. My single depth pleats go in one, out one, in one, out one, and then I get to a double depth pleat. And even as I'm setting this pleat up out to the edge, I'm making sure that that valley is 2 spaces away, not 1. And that goes into, out to the next single depth pleat, which goes in 1, out 1. The next single depth pleat goes in 1, out 1. And then the double depth goes into, out 2. So if you've worked through my general hexagon twists video, you'll know that when we have bigger hexagons, then sometimes we go in 2, out 1, or in 3, out 1. So the out portion is saying the depth of the pleat, because you can go in however many, and then the number you go out is the difference between your mountain and your valley. So that's why we're counting how we're counting. And we have a little bit of space left yet, so I'll flip over and add in 2 more triangle twists. And once that triangle on the vertical pleat is made, I can tuck it into the double depth pleat. And then flipping back up, I have just enough to get a slight edge on there, but it's really 2 squash folds, and just referencing off of how this twist was connected to the previous one, but you wouldn't really even need to do that. You could leave it as is. I just like for practice pieces to have all of the partial twists as well. So from here, we need to know how we're going to get to the next column. And the way that's going to work is the next triangle twist. So we've got our column, and now we're going to repeat our column on the opposite side. And one thing that's kind of lucky for us is that all of our twists have internal grid lines that are aligned with the external grid lines, which means we can fold through them without adding additional lines on our paper, which I think we're going to end up doing because we have so many layers of pleats. I'm going to want to start where there are very few layers, so either at the top or at the bottom here. And the reference that we have for where to put the next line, and we can really space this however we like because all of these pleats are parallel. We're choosing where to put that next triangle to shift where that next set of repeats is going to be. I'm going to put it as close in as I can, which is with the corner right at the closed triangle hole that already exists. So I'm going to have my valley going up and out, my mountain following, and the way I knew that the valley needed to go that direction was because I already had a mountain in this direction. I needed a mountain at 120 degrees. That and lots of experience. So I'm going to open this up, and as I do, it's going to run a vertical down through everything. But that's okay because everything's on grid lines. And I'm going to squash that triangle. So one thing to pay attention to with this tiling is that each hexagon is coming with 2 triangles in the same column. And we have those triangles connected to the single depth pleats, and then the double depth pleats of the hexagons we haven't connected to anything yet, but that's about to change. So I'm going to flip over top to bottom, and now I have a single depth pleat running into a double depth pleat. And so I'm going to be able to add on. I've got my double depth going into, and when I say into, out to, it's from the points of the puffy star. So into, out to, and then I need to run a pleat in a new direction. Again, this is going to go straight through everything. And that's going to be a single depth in one, out one, and then I have another single depth. But before I get to that one, I can actually do something about this single depth pleat going through everything. I can say, okay, wait a second. I can make a pleat, or sorry, make a triangle wrap. Instead of running this pleat through and leaving the first pleat it encounters flat, I can shift the mountain over so it's contacting at 120 degrees, which means the valleys down below are contacting at 120 degrees. That's going to give me the position of the next triangle twist. And then I have one fewer pleat for my vertical to run through. In one, out one, in one, out one. And now I have my new double depth pleat into, out two. And if I've popped the paper up correctly, it's kind of wanting me to set up this single depth pleat at tube pleat spacing to the pleat from the triangle. And so especially making sure that these pleats going through the thick areas are down flat, and that all of my valleys are actually on grid lines, I can squash my new mixed depth hexagon twist. And now I'm going to flip to the opposite side, take this triangle wrap, flip the pleat over and squash it. And I'm also going to set up a triangle on the vertical pleat. So again, these are going through a lot of layers. That's fine. And the vertical pleat is going to have the triangle center, one spacing out from the corner of the open hole. I could also say that the new mountain is going to pass right under the corner of the existing triangle. And I can lay everything down at least locally flat, enough to squash this twist. And actually, while we're right here, I want to return to the top side and set up the triangle that should be up there, which is centered at this point, one spacing out from the hole. So my valley is going up, and I need to pop down the mountain from the previous triangle as the valley passes through. If I had more grid, it would be more dramatic. And that wraps around on the back, and I can squash my new triangle twist. And I can let the triangle down below pass under and inside the double depth plate. So now flipping back to this side, I can, just like I had on the previous end of column, do the little squashy bits to get this very partial hexagon into place, but that doesn't really matter. What I'm more interested in is putting in the new hexagon up here, where I need to open up, and now I've got two single depth plates. I need my double depth plate to go into, out to. So for line of sight here, the in is continuing straight on this grid line, and I'm deflecting one grid direction over to go out. And I can also reference this fold by the fact that the new, I'll keep it oriented, the new diagonal is going to go right to the corner of the existing triangle, and we can set up a triangle wrap with that. And this is going to get rid of all of the creases that were going straight through what we'd folded before. And I'm going to need a new vertical single depth, and finishing out with my new double depth plate to complete the mixed depth hexagon. So there are actually 3 mixed depth hexagons that I know of in terms of shapes. And then you can do multiple different things with those mixed depths. So here we're doing the 1, 1, 2 mixed depth. You can do 1, 2, 1, 2, or sorry, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You can do 2, 2, 1. You can also do 1, 1, 3, 3, 3, 1, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. But it's still those 3 styles of alternating depths 3 times, of having 2 small and 1 big, or 2 big and 1 small. And come to think of it, you could probably do a 1, 2, 3 as well. So opposite sides are the same, but nothing else is. And that would mathematically work out. So I've got my hexagon, flipping over to the opposite side, I can squash the triangle that was wrapped, setting up the new triangle. And at this point in the video, I'm basically repeating steps that we've already seen until the paper is full of this pattern. So it's, what, 30 minutes in. I'm going to start moving a little bit faster so that, well, I'm not here all day, you're not here all day. And if you're watching before you start folding, then you might actually have the time to do it today if I move a little bit faster. So the basic steps of this this pattern, really this tiling, because the tiling, the arrangement of the shapes, is what controls, oh, and there I got a little bit wrapped around, so I want to undo that before I flip, although it looks like it didn't actually matter, but we shall see. Let's put that back. So the arrangement of the twists is what determines the order that you fold them in. And when I say arrangement, I don't mean front or back. I mean, what is the connection style between the twists? Are these going to be hexagons connecting to other hexagons? Are the hexagons only connecting to triangles? Are they connecting to other hexagons on either side or on 3 alternate sides? These are the questions that need to be answered to determine how to fold. So I've reached the end of this column. I'm going to come back to the top of the column and start the next one with a new closed triangle twist. And again, passing through everything we've already done. So while a lot of tessellations could be folded in columns that you then build out, the easier way for most things is to start in the center and do rings around the center. However, for this arrangement of twists, so the 2-fold hexagons connected to hexagons, which I call the hexagons and triangles 2-fold tiling, it is actually better to have one column completed and then move on to the next, for purposes of not having crazy pleat overlaps at the ends of columns as you're working on other things. And so when I'm starting a new column, I use the first triangle to set it up, but then I want to go back and make sure that I get the second triangle, the kind of mate of that first one, into place as well. And then I can continue on with the next sets of things. And squash. And I anticipate that the other side is going to have a little less density of like stuff folding up on top of each other, but we shall see. And actually, one thing I can do is test my intuition about which direction to fold the columns from and see whether or not I actually can fold the columns from the other side. Because again, I haven't folded this tessellation before. This is all new. Kind of scary when a teacher says that, isn't it? But this is the power of thinking from the tiling perspective. If you know already what order, more or less, you're going to do things in, you can apply any things inside of that order. So if I know how to fold a column of hexagons and triangles, then I can fold any column of hexagons and triangles. Doesn't really matter what they are. I can fold with them all single depth. I can fold with some of them double depth. It doesn't make much difference. And so, coming up towards the last bits here. And one way to make this a little bit easier would be to leave this triangle set up as a three-way intersection to free you up to not have the pleat overlap going through everything. And I'll explore that on the other side of the paper. And cleaning up this edge just a little bit. I'm going to set up that little partial on the edge. And so here we can see this pattern is at least aligned with that edge of the paper, which is the non-grid parallel edge. And so if I leave this triangle set up as a wrap, I don't need to run the pleat all the way through before I set up the hexagon, although this one I will need to run through. Now where was that supposed to go? So the partials are always tricky. Ah, I see. That was supposed to go there. And we get that one. And then we can squash triangle 1 and triangle 2 and come in here and get our remaining partial hexagon twist. And that is as much as we can do on this edge. So from here, I wanted to see, maybe, can we start folding on the other side from the thick end? And if I do that, I'm going to be setting up the triangle. I'm going to set it up as a wrap so that when I come in here, okay, I've got the in 2, out 2. I want to set this up, and that will be a wrap there. I've got the next pleat coming out on top. This is actually looking promising. Okay, so we do have a way to do this without folding through a bunch of existing twists, it's just going to set up, you know, a lot of thickness under our twist as we squash. And flip and squash and squash the other triangle. Oh, that's really thick in there. We're going to need to open that up. To let that fully open, because I had another layer of paper inside there. So I need to let that out and open in order to squash. And then I can set up the next triangle as a wrap in here. And by the way, this triangle down below, from starting the column, I can also set up and even squash. That triangle above, I want to leave as a wrap for right now, so I can flip over. And I really want to get the pleats down in here going first, because that's going to be where I need to really open up some paper. And here, this is coming in and going into a triangle wrap with a bunch of layers in it. I want to get this pleat accordioned on top, and this one is over here with the valley right along that folded mountain. So this way is a little bit easier for me, because I've done enough tessellations that use this style of folding. I don't know that I would recommend this amount of layer management for everyone else. But now flipping over, I've got the wrap down below, and these I can tuck into the double depth pleats. And then this one, I really want to open up before I squash to get that extra layer of paper out. So I've got this setup, and here I can do a double depth compound wrap and then close this up above. Got a little bit of conflict, okay, with the layers down below, but I was able to feel that out with my hands. And so what I just did here is this double depth compound wrap. I let the paper come out one past the mountain that I'm wrapping around, and then the double depth requires that I go 2 spaces before I split again. So you can do some fancy things to get that twist in a place where it can squash down flat. It's not entirely required though. And then I'm going to immediately open that up and set up the triangle twist that goes down below. Actually, this is going to run 2 spaces to hit that, and that is going to lay down as a wrap while I come over to the other side. To set up the next pleats. So here I've got that very prominent 2 in, 2 out, or technically it's 2 in, 2 out that way, but you can count it either direction. And I need to pop the mountain that was going up through here and down along the valley, so I can come in and wrap around, and then got the next pleat accordioning on that, and the next pleat is my double depth with the valley along that mountain fold. and squash. So yeah, you can totally get away with not running your plates through the existing pattern, but only if you do some pretty substantial plate management. So squashing that wrap and tucking it under. This is the one where I need to open up that double depth plate, come in and do the double depth wrap, which I'm going to immediately open back up. This line is going to go 2 spacings before it drops into the valley for the next triangle. And I can flip over, and this is a partial twist, but I do still need the double depth pleat going back up. And since I'm right on the edge, I could have gotten away with making that single depth, but if there was something that was going to like feed off of that, I would need it to be double depth in order for everything to work out. So I'm going to keep it double depth even though I have the freedom to move it and come back to this side. So the side where I have a closed triangle hole, and I'm sitting at the top of a lot of layers of paper, and I'm going to put in a triangle wrap that is going to feed into my mixed depth hexagon on the opposite side. Flipping over, I've got my double depth pleat coming in here. Got my single depth. I can set up my next single depth that really helps with seeing what's going on. Need to run a single depth out this way and then get that triangle wrap, which this has all kinds of layers tucked into it. And this needs to lay flat. It's all about the pleat management. We get this sitting accordioned on top, just like we saw in the previous round. So there's multiple ways to fold this tessellation. The best one for me may or may not be the best one for you. But one thing's for sure, you definitely want to do the first column before adding any new ones. Regardless of how difficult these extra layers may seem, it is fewer layers in fewer directions than if you try to go across instead of up and down. So flipping over, I can get my new triangles from the wraps. And this one I'm going to have to untuck that double depth layer. And one of the cool things about using this tiling is that we actually get to see both the right and left-handed forms of everything that we're doing. So every time we go to a new column, we have a different handedness. And then this is going to open up, and we'll put in the new triangle wrap, which is a 3-way intersection on this side. And flipping over, I can spot into, out to, next valley needs to come through here, because in one, out one for the mountain. and I'll set up that triangle wrap, remembering to keep everything else that was already there folded, and then accordion on top of that, and I can get my new twist in place. So yeah, this is a much better practice piece for this twist than either of the other two patterns that I showed in the beginning, because we actually are getting lots of practice with the twist. Not just, oh, let's do 4 of them and call it a day. And by the way, at the top of this column, I can get in a partial triangle twist right up there. And in here, I'm going to need to do that double depth wrap. So this is coming 2 spacings out, turning, well, splitting, and going 2 spaces down in, and then you have 1 spacing at the split to hit the valley. And you can choose, so there's another overlap up above, whether to open and refold. What I've been doing is letting this double depth pleat go through first and then fold on top. And now we open all of that to let the new triangle wrap come into being, and flip over. I've got my into, out to, so that is where my valley will come in, and set up the next wrap here again. And this time, to make things simple, instead of, so this is the place where we could, where like according to the pattern it's a double depth pleat, but because we're at the edge we can get away with making it single depth. And I'm gonna make it single because that makes things a lot easier to fold on, less density, etc., etc. And with that as a single depth pleat through here, now when I flip over, I can squash both of my triangle wraps without doing the extra funny business. So again, this is something that I was able to take advantage of because I'm at the edge of the paper. And so I can set up another triangle wrap. This will be, well, we don't even get a full hexagon. We'll get little bits of hexagon. This is, I want to say, our last biggest hexagon. We shall see. Not that. Just going to keep on extending there. And coming over here, we get that triangle. So in order to add anything more, I'm going to need to come up to this triangle, and I can get a partial triangle twist. And then coming up to the next, I can get a little bit more than that. I'm going to set this up as a triangle wrap, and flipping over, I get a very partial hexagon corner. Flipping back, I can resolve my wrap into a full triangle twist. And if I want to, I can go ahead and resolve this, and it's really just going to be laying this flap down So the raw edge is on the folded edge there to match what shows up in other locations. All right, so that was a longer tutorial. I call this tessellation Giant's Causeway because it looks like stairs for giants, or giant footprints, depending how you want to look at it. And I did say that I was going to show you that other mixed depth hexagon twist. So this one was the 1-1-2. We're going to look at the 2-2-1. So coming in here, if I want a 2-2-1, I'm going to start with a double depth pleat, and I'm just randomly orienting this on the paper. I'm going to add another double depth pleat. So now that there's two of them, I can see the into, out to. So that's where I'm going to add my single depth, and then into, out to. I'm going to add another double depth, into, out to. I'm going to have a double depth and then a single depth right at the end. And this one is not centered on a grid intersection either, so I couldn't have centered it if I tried. But basically, it's like we took a double depth open hexagon twist and shrunk two sides, instead of taking the single depth open hexagon twist and expanding it. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do. Like I mentioned before, you can also do a triple depth. And let's see, I have, this one actually is centered on a grid intersection. So you can set it up as these two kites around the center, getting this bow tie shape. So this is the two triple depth plates are on the same grid line. And bring this in, and I really want to make these edges a lot nicer, get those kind of hexagon-y dimples in them before I squash. I don't want to squash from up high because that's really hard to hold on to everything. I want things stable, and then I can squash. This would be another fun one to try in this structure that we worked on today. And you would get like even more elongation. And one of the things that's going on with this one is that it's a slit on the back. There's no open hole. So when you're doing your triangles on the back, you're actually going to need to have the have one of the triangles be completely covered by the triple depth plate. But I would love for someone to do this, and with the triple depth, you're going to end up, I think, touching on multiple corners. So it's going to be a very interesting structure to work with. So yeah, because that would be a slit, we would get all the way over here with the triple depth hexagon. But who knows? I'll leave it for you to find out. So happy folding, everyone, and I'll see you next week to talk about way more way more hybrid hexagon twists than I ever thought existed a couple months ago. And it's bringing so many more design options into being. And there's so many ways to practice them.